They laughed the day Ethan Carter sold his biggest tractor. It wasn't quiet laughter either. It spread across the co-op yard like wine through dry corn. Quick, sharp, and impossible to ignore. "You serious, Ethan?" Dale called out, leaning against a truck, shaking his head. "You're letting that thing go for what?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He tightened the last chain on the trailer, securing the massive machine he'd relied on for years. It gleamed under the sun, modern, powerful, expensive, and heavy. Too heavy. He stepped back, wiped his hands on his jeans, and finally said, "I don't need it anymore." That was all it took. The laughter got louder. "You don't need it?" another farmer echoed. "You've got the biggest acreage out of half of us." "Harvest coming," someone else added. "You planning to do it with a shovel?" Ethan didn't argue. He didn't explain. Because explaining something people had already decided to laugh, that was a waste of time. Instead, he watched as the buyer drove away with the tractor, watched the dust trail stretch across the road until it disappeared. Then he turned toward what he had left. A smaller machine, a red Massey Ferguson, parked off to the side like it didn't belong in the same conversation. It wasn't new, not even close, but it was different. Dale walked over, hands on his hips. "So that's it. That's your big plan." Ethan glanced at the Massey, then back at him. "It's enough." Dale let out a breath that sounded like disbelief more than anything else. "You're downsizing before harvest." "That's not enough, Ethan. That's risky." Ethan nodded once. "Yeah. And you're just okay with that?" "I'm okay with working smarter." Dale chuckled. "We'll see how smart it feels when you're behind schedule." Ethan didn't respond. Because the truth was, Dale wasn't wrong about the risk. He was wrong about everything else. The first few days after the switch didn't help Ethan's case. The Massey Ferguson looked small in the open fields. Where the old tractor had covered ground with brute force, the Massey moved with a steadier, slower rhythm. It didn't roar. It didn't dominate. It worked. But from a distance, it didn't look impressive. And out here, impressions mattered more than they should. By the third day, word had already spread. He's gonna fall behind. No way that thing keeps up. Harvest's gonna bury him. Ethan heard it all, sometimes directly, sometimes carried on the wind when he passed by others working their land. Still, he didn't change pace. Because what they didn't see was what was happening underneath. The fields Ethan worked weren't the same as they had been years ago. The soil had changed, compacted in places, softer in others, uneven from seasons of heavy machinery pressing it down again and again. His old tractor had power, but it also had weight. Too much of it. It dug deep when it didn't need to, packed soil tighter, left ruts that took more time to fix than to avoid. The Massey didn't do that. It moved lighter, more controlled. It didn't fight the ground. It worked with it. On the fifth day, Dale drove over, parking near the edge of Ethan's field. He stepped out, watching as the smaller tractor moved steadily across the rows. "You're still behind," Dale called out. Ethan shut off the engine and climbed down. "Am I?" Dale pointed toward the far section. "You'd be done with that by now if you kept your old machine." Ethan followed his gaze, then nodded. "Maybe." Dale frowned. "That doesn't bother you?" Ethan shook his head. "Not really." "Why not?" Ethan crouched down, scooping up a handful of soil. He let it crumble through his fingers. "Because last year," he said, "this part of the field took twice as long to recover after harvest." Dale hesitated. "That's just how it is." "No," Ethan said calmly. "That's how it becomes." Dale didn't have an answer for that. But he wasn't convinced either. "Look," he said after a moment, "I get trying something different. But this? Downsizing right before harvest season? That's not different. That's gambling." Ethan stood up, brushing dirt from his hands. "Only if you don't know what you're betting on." Dale studied him for a second, then shook his head. "You always were stubborn." Ethan gave a faint smile. "Only when I'm right." Dale laughed once, but it didn't carry the same certainty as before. "We'll see. They always said that. We'll see." Harvest didn't wait. It came fast, like it always did. Fields turning ready almost overnight, the air shifting, the pressure building across every farm in the county. Engines started earlier. Lights stayed on later. Sleep became optional. And suddenly, the question wasn't whether Ethan's choice was risky. It was whether it would survive. The first few days were exactly what everyone expected. The bigger machines moved faster, covered more ground, finished sections ahead of schedule. From the outside, it looked like Ethan was falling behind. Again, Dale drove past one morning, slowing just enough to call out, Told you. Ethan didn't stop working. Because now, the difference was starting to show. Not in speed. In efficiency. Where other tractors had to slow down through uneven patches, the Massey kept a steady pace. Where heavier machines struggled with traction in softer sections, Ethan adjusted and kept moving. Where others had to double back to fix missed or damaged rows, Ethan didn't. He wasn't faster in bursts. He was consistent. And consistency started to add up. By the fourth day of harvest, something changed. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But enough. Dale noticed it first. He was ahead. He knew that. His numbers were strong, his progress solid. But when he compared sections, really compared them, something didn't line up. Ethan's rows were cleaner. More uniform. Less damage. It didn't make sense. Later that afternoon, Dale drove over again. This time without the same confidence. He parked, stepped out, and watched in silence as the Massey Ferguson moved across the field, steady as ever. Not rushing. Not struggling. Just working. Ethan finished the pass, turned, and shut off the engine. Dale walked closer, scanning the rows. "You didn't have to redo any of this?" he asked. Ethan shook his head. "No." Dale crouched, running his hand over the harvested ground. No deep ruts. No torn sections. Just clean work. He stood up slowly. "That shouldn't be possible," he said. Ethan shrugged. "It is." Dale looked back at the tractor, the same one he had laughed at days earlier. "You're still slower," he said, almost like he needed to hold on to that. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, but..." He didn't finish the sentence. Because now, he wasn't sure how it ended. Ethan climbed back into the Massey, starting the engine again. That same low, steady sound filled the air. Reliable. Unshaken. As he pulled forward into the next row, Dale stayed where he was, watching, thinking, recalculating. Because for the first time since Ethan sold that big tractor, the laughter was gone, and something else had taken its place. Doubt. Not in Ethan. In themselves. The shift didn't happen all at once. But by the sixth day of harvest, everyone could feel it. It showed up in small things first. Machines idling longer than they should, farmers walking their fields more often, conversations turning quieter, more careful. Because the numbers were starting to speak. And they weren't saying what anyone expected. Dale saw it clearly one evening as he stood by his truck, staring out across his own field. He was ahead, on paper at least. More acreage covered. More hours logged. But the yield bins told a different story. There was more loss than there should have been. Broken stalks. Uneven rows. Sections that had to be revisited. It wasn't failure. But it wasn't clean. And out here, clean mattered. He looked across the distance toward Ethan's land. The smaller tractor was still moving. Same pace. Same steady rhythm. Dale shook his head, almost frustrated with himself. "It's just timing," he muttered. "He'll fall behind." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it the same way anymore. The next morning proved why. A light rain had passed through overnight. Not enough to stop work, but enough to change the ground. The top layers softened, turning certain sections into a slick, uneven mess. By mid-morning, engines were already straining. Rick's machine spun its tires trying to push through a low patch. Another farmer had to pull out completely, unwilling to risk getting stuck. Dale tried adjusting his approach, slowing down, shifting angles. But even his tractor struggled to maintain traction. He pulled back, irritated, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. "This is going to cost us time," he muttered. Then he heard it. That same low, steady engine note. He turned. Ethan's Massey Ferguson was moving through the same patch. Not aggressively. Not forcing it. Just moving. The tires didn't spin wildly. They gripped, carefully, deliberately, finding traction where the heavier machines couldn't. Ethan adjusted slightly, guiding the tractor across the uneven ground like he already knew where the resistance would be. And just like that, he passed through. No stall. No struggle. No wasted motion. Dale stared, disbelief tightening in his chest. "That doesn't make sense," he said under his breath. Rick walked up beside him, watching the same thing. "It does," Rick replied quietly. Dale glanced at him. "What?" Rick nodded toward the Massey. "Less weight. Better balance. He's not fighting the ground. He's working with it." Dale didn't respond. Because that sounded too simple. And yet there it was. Right in front of them. By the end of that day, the gap had closed. Not dramatically, but enough. Ethan wasn't behind anymore. He was right there. And the difference wasn't speed. It was waste. Or rather, the lack of it. while others lost time correcting mistakes, navigating damage, or dealing with ground conditions. Ethan just kept going. Steady, consistent, uninterrupted. On the final stretch of harvest, the pressure peaked. Long days stretched into longer nights. Lights cut through the darkness as machines pushed toward the finish. This was where bigger equipment usually pulled ahead. More power, more coverage, more output. Dale expected it. Everyone did. But it didn't happen, because by now, the pattern was clear. The larger tractors moved faster, but not cleanly. They gained ground, then lost time fixing it. Ethan never gained as much at once, but he never lost it either. And over time, that mattered more. On the last day, the field stood quiet. Engines shut off one by one. The work was done. Dale stood at the edge of his land, looking over what remained, then over at Ethan's field. Finished. Clean. No rework. No damage. Just results. He walked over without saying anything at first. Ethan was leaning against the Massey Ferguson, wiping down the side panel, the red paint catching the last light of the day. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Dale exhaled slowly. "You finished ahead of me," he said. Ethan didn't look up. "Yeah." Dale shook his head, a quiet disbelief still lingering. But it wasn't resistance anymore. It was acceptance. "I don't get it," he admitted. "On paper, you shouldn't have." Ethan set the rag down and finally met his eyes. "On paper," he said, "bigger always wins." Dale gave a small, tired laugh. "Yeah, but fields aren't paper." That landed. Because it was true. Dale looked back at the tractor, the same one he had laughed at not long ago. Smaller, older, unimpressive, and yet, it had outperformed everything. "So what now?" Dale asked. Ethan shrugged lightly. "Now? Same as always. Which is, use what works." Dale nodded slowly. He glanced back at his own machine in the distance. Bigger, louder, more powerful. Then back at the Massey. "Might have to rethink a few things," he said. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because the lesson wasn't something you argued. It was something you saw. And once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the fields, Ethan climbed back into the Massey Ferguson one last time and started the engine. That same steady rumble filled the air. Unchanged. Unbothered. Proven. He drove it slowly across the edge of the land. Not in a hurry, not chasing anything. Because he wasn't trying to prove a point anymore. He already had. The machine they laughed at was the one that finished stronger than all the rest.